imagine you are sitting in a prison cell, right?
Yeah, not a great start.
No, definitely not. And you are facing these really severe criminal charges for inciting, I think the phrase is serious public order chaos.
Right.
And the entire weight of the prosecution's case against you is resting on a single social media retweet that you made.
Just one retweet.
Just one. So obviously you need to mount a defense. But instead of, calling up a lawyer to argue about free speech or freedom of expression, you ask the guards for a pen and you just start writing out theoretical physics equations.
Which is, it's a profound pivot from how we typically think about the law, right?
Completely.
You have a man whose actual liberty is on the line, and he's choosing to fight a legal battle using computer science, network topology, and the mathematics of chaos.
And that is the exact scenario at the heart of our deep dive today. Our source material for this is an extraordinary document. It's known as the Blood Letter of Defense, and it was written from prison by Dr. Chen Jingyuan. He's using the fundamental laws of physics to mathematically prove that his retweet couldn't possibly have caused the chaos he's accused of.
He is quite literally fighting a legal charge with math.
Exactly. Our mission today is to really unpack how he does this. But before we jump completely in, we do have to put a quick disclaimer out there for you listening.
Right, very important.
This source material is highly, highly politically charged. Dr. Chen's defense involves some heavy accusations, things like a judicial mafia, political framing, state security issues, all of that.
Yeah, it's a very tense context.
It really is.
Yeah.
So to be totally clear, we aren't here to take sides or, validate his political views or endorse the prosecution's charges either. We are strictly acting as impartial guides today.
We're just looking at the collision between the legal frameworks and scientific reality. We're purely unpacking the mechanics of his argument.
Right, how someone actually uses complex system science as a shield against a criminal charge.
And to do that, his entire defense really requires the court to accept a baseline assumption about the internet itself.
Okay, what is it?
He argues that the digital space is, by its very nature, chaotic.
And he leans on actual computer science to back this up, right?
Yeah.
This isn't just a philosophical point.
No, not at all. He uses a concept known as the CAP theorem.
Okay, the CAP theorem. Let's unpack this a bit.
So the CAP theorem was proposed by a computer scientist named Eric Brewer back in 2000. And it basically serves as a foundational rule for distributed data systems.
Which obviously includes massive global social networks.
Exactly. The theorem proves that in any distributed system, you can only mathematically guarantee 2 out of 3 specific properties at any given time.
And those are?
Consistency, availability, and partition tolerance.
Okay, let's break this down. Consistency means everyone on the network sees the exact same piece of data at the exact same millisecond.
Yeah.
And availability means the system is always up. It's always responding to your requests.
Right. It doesn't just hang there forever.
And then partition tolerance. That means the system continues to operate even if, certain nodes or parts of the network drop offline or experience lag or just get completely disconnected.
And that last one is key, because in the context of a massive global network spanning millions of devices, partition tolerance is non-negotiable.
Sure, because connections drop all the time.
Exactly. People's phones lose signal, servers experience micro outages, cables get cut. The network absolutely must survive those partitions.
Right.
And designers also have to prioritize availability, because if an app doesn't load immediately when you open it, you just close it. That system is functionally useless.
Okay, so if you have to have partition tolerance and you have to have availability, then by mathematically locking those two in, the architecture inherently and unavoidably sacrifices consistency.
I really like to visualize this like the difference between a choir and a cocktail party.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Ha!
Right. Because imagine you have a highly disciplined choir, and they're all singing from the exact same sheet music.
Yeah.
Everyone is in perfect sync, hitting the same note at the exact same millisecond.
Total synchronization.
That is absolute consistency. But if one person coughs or loses their page, the conductor has to halt the entire performance. The choir has 0 partition tolerance.
Yeah, the whole system breaks down.
Exactly. But a global social network, on the other hand, is like a crowded, noisy cocktail party. Everyone is having different conversations at the same time. It's always available. People can come and go as they please.
But there is absolutely no singular, consistent narrative happening at any given second.
Right. And that analogy captures the physical reality of the network perfectly. Dr. Chen uses this architectural truth to dismantle the prosecution's core claim.
Because the prosecution alleges his retweet caused chaos or disorder in the public sphere.
But according to the CAP theorem, a distributed network's baseline physical property literally is inconsistency and disorder. A perfectly orderly, globally consistent social media platform is a mathematical impossibility.
You can't accuse someone of making the cocktail party noisy because a cocktail party is noisy by definition.
Exactly. He's arguing that, chaos isn't a crime he committed. Chaos is simply the built-in operating environment.
But he doesn't stop there. He establishes the chaotic nature of the environment, but then he really zeroes in on the actual structure of that environment.
Because, to go back to the party analogy, not everyone at the cocktail party is holding a megaphone.
Right, the internet is not a flat playing field, and this involves the Barabasi-Albert model of scale-free networks.
Okay, break that down for us.
Back in the late 1990s, Albert Laszlo Barabasi and Rika Albert mapped the World Wide Web. And what they discovered is that complex networks are not random. They are what we call scale-free.
Meaning they follow a power law distribution.
Exactly. This means the vast, vast majority of the network's structure is held together by a very small number of massive hubs.
So we're talking about mega influencers, celebrities, major news outlets.
And algorithmic recommendation engines. These hubs have millions of connections. But the rest of the network, the overwhelming majority of it, is made up of millions upon millions of peripheral nodes.
And those peripheral nodes only have a tiny handful of connections.
Yes. Now, according to the sources, Dr. Chen's account is the ultimate peripheral node.
Oh, for sure. He had, fewer than 100 followers?
Fewer than 100 followers, and most of those were totally inactive, what we'd call zombie accounts. His historic interaction rate was virtually non-existent.
So the defense asks a really important structural question here. What happens to a scale-free network if a peripheral node acts erratically, or is even removed entirely?
And Dr. Chen introduces Reuven Cohen's network robustness theory to answer that.
Which proves what?
Cohen proved mathematically that in these scale-free structures, you can randomly remove almost 100% of the peripheral nodes, and the core network will remain completely intact.
Because the hubs are holding the structure together.
Exactly. The system possesses extreme inherent robustness at its edges.
I do struggle with that a bit, though.
How so?
Well, because even a whisper in a crowded room is heard by someone, right? Like, if I have 100 followers, one of them might be a massive influencer who happens to see my tweet and then tells their massive audience.
Ah, right.
So the structure might be robust, but his influence isn't automatically zero just because he sits on the periphery, is it? Information still travels.
And that right there is the exact leap in logic that the prosecution relies on.
Okay.
To counter it, Dr. Chen transitions his defense from the static structure of the network to the dynamic mathematics of how information actually spreads.
He brings in the Galton-Watson branching process.
Yes.
Which is literally the actual math of going viral.
It is. The Galton-Watson process models cascades. Physicists use it for, nuclear chain reactions. Epidemiologists use it for tracking viruses. And data scientists use it for information spread.
And the crucial metric in this model is something called M, right?
Right. M, or sometimes R naught. It's the mean offspring number.
So this represents the average number of secondary events caused by a primary event. Like, for every one person who retweets something, how many new people, on average, will see it and retweet it again?
Exactly. And the threshold for M is incredibly strict. If M is greater than 1, the system is considered supercritical.
Meaning the cascade can grow exponentially. The retweet goes viral.
Yes. If M is exactly 1, it's a critical state, just kind of lingering on the edge. But if M is less than 1, the system is subcritical. The cascade will mathematically decay and eventually die out.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because the sources detail how Dr. Chen actually calculates his specific M value from his prison cell.
He doesn't just rely on the theory. He plugs in his actual account data.
Right, so he starts with his total followers, which is under 100. He factors in the active follower ratio, which the data suggests is only about 15%.
Then he applies a standard retweet probability of 1%.
And this is crucial, he incorporates a time decay factor, acknowledging that social media information gets stale incredibly fast.
Yeah, we need to really visualize how that time decay factor works in a digital environment.
Okay, give us an analogy.
Imagine trying to start a fire with damp wood.
All right.
You strike a match, and you manage to get a single twig to catch fire. but the dampness in the wood around it absorbs the heat way faster than the flame can actually spread.
So the environment itself is acting as a friction mechanism.
Exactly. In Dr. Chen's case, the algorithm's fast-moving feed and the low engagement of his few followers act like that damp wood. The mathematical friction basically guarantees the energy of his retweet is absorbed rather than transmitted.
So when he crunches all of those variables, the followers, the engagement, the damp wood friction, his mean offspring number, his NOM, sits between 0.05 and 0.12.
Which is deeply, deeply in the subcritical zone.
Wow.
In the Galton-Watson model, an M of 0.12 means the extinction probability of the cascade is essentially 100%. The mathematical friction will violently crush the spread of that information.
Let's actually put a real number on that for you listening. Using that M of 0.12, the expected cascade size, meaning the total number of secondary retweets he can ever expect to generate, is calculated at approximately 1.05 to 1.11.
Yeah.
Meaning if he hits retweet, the math dictates it results in a fraction of a single secondary retweet. It is an absolute, undeniable mathematical failure to spread.
He provides a statistical guarantee of silence. He proves that a node with his parameters physically lacks the kinetic energy to cause a widespread reaction.
But wait, what about the butterfly effect? We've all heard the theory, right?
Yeah.
A butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can set off a tornado in Texas. Even with an expected cascade size of 1, couldn't his one tiny retweet be the single grain of sand that causes an already fragile sand pile to collapse?
People always bring that up.
Right. Couldn't he be the trigger for the chaos, regardless of his own low kinetic energy?
That is probably the most common misunderstanding of the butterfly effect, and Dr. Chen addresses this head-on. He uses the theory of self-organized criticality, or SOC, which was pioneered by the physicist Purbach.
And SOC utilizes the exact metaphor I just brought up, the sand pile.
Yes.
So I really want to picture this. How does the sand pile physics work in this defense?
Okay, so picture a flat table. You begin dropping grains of sand onto it one by one. Over time, they form a pile. As the pile grows taller, the sides get steeper and steeper, eventually reaching what physicists call the angle of repose.
Maximum steepness before it falls.
Exactly. At this exact angle, the pile enters a critical state. Now, in this highly unstable, supercritical state where m equals or exceeds 1, dropping one more grain of sand can indeed trigger a massive catastrophic avalanche.
Okay, so the avalanche happens. But it isn't really the fault of the final grain of sand, is it? The fault lies in the fact that the pile was dangerously unstable in the first place.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Dr. Chen delivers just a brilliant counter-argument here.
Yeah.
He points out that the prosecution has provided zero evidence that the social media network was in a supercritical state at the exact moment he hit retweet.
Right.
Furthermore, he argues that if the network was highly unstable and primed for an avalanche, the true structural damage isn't caused by the final grain of sand. The damage is caused by whatever built the dangerous pile.
And in a scale-free network, the entities building that pile are the hubs.
Exactly.
The massive accounts with millions of followers, or the algorithms deciding what goes into the feeds.
But Dr. Chen takes it even further. He claims that the hubs responsible for destabilizing the network include the judicial authorities themselves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He argues that when authorities abuse power or create systemic injustices, they are the ones piling the sand dangerously high. They push the public sphere into a critical state.
So to blame the resulting avalanche on a peripheral node sending a subcritical tweet, it's just a fundamental misdirection of causality. And I mean, think about how you experience the internet every day. When you see genuine, massive viral outrage, it doesn't happen because one random user with 10 followers whispered into the void.
Never.
It happens because the algorithm, or huge media hubs, actively push that system into a critical state. They prime the network for the avalanche. You can't blame the collapse of the mountain on a guy standing at the bottom throwing a pebble.
No, you can't. And this raises a really important question about how the law actually assigns blame. Dr. Chen highlights this massive disconnect between the scientific physics of the network and the arbitrary thresholds set by the legal system.
Let's actually look at the legal standard he is up against. According to the source material, the judicial standard being applied to Dr. Chen is known as the two highs interpretation.
Right.
And this standard dictates that a social media post must reach 500 retweets or 5,000 views to constitute a serious crime of defamation or public disorder.
But that threshold is a purely linear manufactured number.
Yeah.
Now compare that 500 retweet threshold to the scientific reality we just walked through. Dr. Chen's expected cascade size, rigorously derived from the Galton-Watson process, is roughly 1.
1.
The legal threshold for a crime is 500. There is a 500-fold order of magnitude difference between the physical reality of his network influence and the baseline legal charge leveled against him.
So what does this all mean? When you pull back and view this blood letter of defense in its entirety, Dr. Chen is essentially arguing that the prosecution is trapped in a mindset of linear Newtonian logic.
Yeah, they are operating like it's 17th century physics. You threw the rock, the window broke, therefore you caused the chaos.
But the internet is not a pane of glass. It is a non-linear, complex adaptive system. The prosecution is trying to use billiard ball physics to explain weather patterns.
That's a perfect way to put it. Under complex system science, the idea that a deep subcritical node could trigger a macro avalanche all on its own isn't just unlikely, it is a mathematical impossibility.
Right.
By demanding that his solitary retweet cause systemic chaos, the prosecution is basically demanding that the fundamental laws of physics be suspended just so they can secure a conviction.
It's just an incredible strategy. I mean, he forces the prosecution entirely out of the comfortable realm of subjective legal interpretation, where they can debate things like intent or harm.
And drags them into the unforgiving realm of objective mathematical proof.
Yes. He uses the CAP theorem to prove the internet is inherently chaotic by design. He uses Reuven-Cohen's network formula to prove peripheral nodes don't break scale-free structures.
He uses the Galton-Watson branching process to prove his specific retweet had a 100% chance of extinction.
And he uses the sandpile theory of self-organized criticality to prove that avalanches are caused by hubs, not individual grains of sand.
So if the prosecution wants to maintain their narrative of cause and effect, they have to mathematically disprove his mean offspring number. They have to defeat the physics.
And physics is entirely indifferent to legal strategy. It really makes you realize how ancient our legal frameworks actually are. I mean, we've built centuries of jurisprudence on the idea of simple, linear cause and effect. One action directly causes one visible reaction.
But we don't live in that world anymore.
We don't. We spend our lives inside massive, nonlinear digital ecosystems governed by algorithms, power laws, and cascade dynamics.
The digital realm has completely outgrown the Newtonian laws that our courts rely on.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up today's deep dive. If Dr. Chen is right, and the law must eventually obey the rules of complex systems and network mathematics, where does that actually take us next?
That's the big question.
Think about it. What happens when authorities start using artificial intelligence to predict these avalanches before they even happen?
Oh, wow, like a predictive model.
Yeah. If a predictive algorithm decides that your social media account has become a hub in a supercritical state, that your M value is just dangerously high, could you find yourself arrested for a retweet you haven't even made yet, simply because the math says you are a risk to the sandpile?
It's a chilling prospect. We'd be moving from a world of prosecuting actions to a world of policing mathematical probabilities.
It definitely changes the way you look at the structure of your own social media feed. Well, thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the blood letter of defense and for exploring the fascinating high-stakes collision of law, physics, and the internet. Until next time, keep questioning the connections.